The legalization of same-sex marriage in Iowa created a battleground of sorts, involving Iowa's Constitution, its Supreme Court justices, and the definitions of marriage, family, and civil rights. We explore these issues on Iowa's Marriage Battleground.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Iowa's Marriage Battleground. Iowa is one of 5 states that issues marriage licenses to same-sex couples. The change in Iowa law became effective in April of 2009. Within the first year, more than 2,000 same-gender marriages took place in the state. Several national polls indicate a growing number of Americans support same-sex marriage, 53%, according to a recent ABC Washington Post survey. But a look at news from other states proves there is still strong resistance. Minnesota lawmakers voted to put on the ballot a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. Rhode Island is looking at allowing civil unions between same-sex couples as opposed to full marriage. In the state of New York, the Senate vote on same-sex marriage is one of the issues prolonging the legislative session, which was to end on June 20, as ongoing negotiations are keeping legislators at work. Now in Iowa, it's clear that the fight over same-sex marriage isn't going away.
This is a battleground.
And politicians won't let it, even though polls suggest that the public may be growing tired of the fight. According to the Iowa poll, 30% of Iowans polled said that they just don't care much when asked if they favored or opposed the Iowa Supreme Court decision that allows gay and lesbian couples to marry in Iowa. The poll, which was conducted for the Des Moines Register, also revealed 37% opposed or strongly opposed the court ruling, and 32% favored it or strongly favored it. The Iowa poll also indicated some ambivalence on the part of Iowans, noting that if there were a vote on a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage, 25% polled said they would not vote. Although a large number of Iowans are in the middle on this issue of same-sex marriage, it has continued to be the focus of political strategists both within the state and also from beyond Iowa's borders. Added pressure comes with Iowa's first-in-the-nation presidential test. And also the growing role that social conservatives, for whom repeal of same-sex marriage statutes is a sacred issue, will play in determining the GOP nominee. However, Republican presidential candidates have said little about the issue in their announcement speeches when outlining the focus of their campaigns. The battle surrounding the issue is also propelled by Iowans who support same-sex marriage. Still feeling the sting of the defeat of 3 Supreme Court justices' campaigns to retain their seats on the bench, supporters are fighting back. The issue cuts across party lines. Conservative Republican and former state Senator Jeff Angelo, who once stood against same-sex marriage, has changed his position.
Well, I started out as an opponent, a political opponent of same-sex marriage. I, in fact, was a lead sponsor of a constitutional amendment to define marriage between a man and a woman. I understand the arguments of the opponents. I thought them through and made many of them myself. But my mind began to change because I was forming close relationships with Iowans who are gay, and talking to them as a friend, and talking to them about their lives in their communities, and really becoming close to gay neighbors and friends here in Iowa. And I began to be able to get past the fact that this is an issue where we throw a lot of statistics, facts, ideology. This is in fact an issue that affects real people. We are actually a country that prides ourselves on fairness and equality under the law, even if in a free country our beliefs differ. And I simply said I can no longer demean the humanity of my friends and neighbors who are gay. I believe that it's important to stand up for them and say that they're equal partners in our society, that I understand when they're asking for marriage, they're asking for what I ask for. I really think that the Republican Party that I know and I love is a party that values individual freedom, that it values individual liberty, that it values limited government and personal responsibility. And I think that because we've been portrayed as somewhat monolithic on this issue, that we are of one voice, that Republicans are against marriage equality, it really is actually not compatible with all of the other issues that we seem to stand for. I'm very proud of my party for talking about the Constitution, for talking about limited government and individual freedom, but my goal is that more and more Republicans would become convinced that supporting marriage equality, the freedom to marry, is certainly something that is consistent with our party platform, what our party stands for. And I'd like to see our party take a stand through the platform process, through the caucus process here in Iowa in favor of the freedom to marry. I think that it's easy to come onto a radio show or a television show and start saying phrases like anarchy and promising the apocalypse. At some point you have to say, look, we know this is going on. What do I see with my own eyes? Is this in fact truly something poor going on in society because of this? Or in fact, is marriage, which is recognized by conservatives as having healthy benefits to society, isn't it healthy for society that we convey that status on more people, that they actually want to become married and be in stable monogamous relationships and raise their children? I think there's actually a positive benefit to more people saying we recognize the value of marriage in our communities.
These fights and the personalities that propel them will be profiled in this one-hour special report examining the stakes involved in the continued battle. Included in the program will be a panel discussion with key players and reports about the fight in Iowa and also nationally. But first, let's take a look at a video excerpt from the In the Life. That comes to us from an organization producing documentary programming about gay and lesbian issues. We'll be looking at more video from the In the Life documentary later in this program, but now let's hear from our guests. Bob Vander Plaats is the lead effort. He led the effort to unseat the Supreme Court justices in the last election and is playing a lead role in continuing this campaign. He is president and CEO of the Family Leader Organization, which encompasses the activities of the Iowa Family Policy Center and Marriage Matters. Connie Ryan Terrell is executive director of the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. She is also a board member of One Iowa, the state's largest LGBT advocacy organization. And she also chairs the board of Justice Not Politics, a bipartisan organization trying to preserve what they see as the intent of the judges' retention process. Tamara Scott is the state director for Concerned Women for America. Scott is also host of the internet show called Truth for Our Times and serves on the United States Commission on Civil Rights State Advisory Committee. Senator Matt McCoy is serving his 5th term in the Iowa Senate after serving 2 terms in the Iowa House. The Democrat represents Senate District 31, which includes the south, southwestern, and western portions of Des Moines. McCoy is also a board member of One Iowa. To all of you, thank you for coming in for this program. Bob, I want to start with you. Tell me where you stand on this issue and why.
I think it's very clear where I stand on this issue is we believe marriage is clearly between one man and one woman. That's God's design for marriage. It's God's design for the family. We believe that's the foundation of our country. I mean, when our founders say we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, they mean we have a higher standard. It's not according to Bob or Matt or Tamara or Connie or to Paul, but there's a higher standard. There's a basic design for the family. And when you deviate from that, I believe that's not good for society. And so we're willing to stand up, and we want to do what's best for kids. We want to do what's best for families. And the mission of the Family Leader is to strengthen families. That's where we stand on this.
Was there one part of your life that made you think or believe that way?
No, I don't think there's one part of my life at all that made me believe that way. I mean, I was raised in a very Christian home, a very loving home, where marriage was modeled for me. I was taught the Scripture in church, as well as in the school that I attended. And obviously, once I graduated from college, I questioned a lot of my beliefs, I think like a lot of young adults do. But truth is still truth, and truth can stand in the light of day. And so that's where we land. And being an educator, I'm always looking at what is best for kids. I used to be a teacher, a coach, and a high school principal. I believe all research points out that the best environment for children is with a mom and a dad. And so that's what we're going to stand on, to strengthen families.
All right, Connie, I'm going to ask you the same question. Why do you stand where you do?
Well, thank you, Paul, for having each of us here today. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. I am firmly in the camp where marriage equality is where we should be in this state, and I'm very proud to be an Iowan, and that we have marriage equality in this state. The Varnum decision was a fantastic decision, and as folks read through that and become educated on the issue, I believe that they'll come to that understanding. I believe that all people have the right to be happy, to be in a committed, loving relationship. That relationship they get to choose. And I believe that people, whether it's one man and one woman, or whether it's two men or two women, they get to choose who they love and what relationship they want to be in. And I believe that our civil laws have to uphold that and give equal protection to those families and those couples.
Was there anything in your life or background growing up that made you believe that way?
Absolutely. I also grew up in a very loving household with two very loving parents. Grew up as a Christian. I was part of lots of different family situations and environments, including the church. And we were taught that all people were equal. All people get to be respected by us and by our state, that our neighbors are important to us, and that we should love and respect one another. I believe that in my life that was modeled through my parents and my grandparents and people at my church. But most importantly, it was about civil law and people being treated equally by the law.
Tamara, you get the same question. Why you and your organization believe the way you do?
Well, like Bob's organization, Concerned Women for America, does believe in the biblical tenets, and we support the institution of marriage as God designed it, one man, one woman. It was the first institution before God created government or before God created the church. He created marriage as one man, one woman. And so we certainly, when we look back to those tenets and to the founding of our country, our forefathers were so incredibly gifted in drawing back on the biblical principles and standing firm on those. And the Blackstone commentaries that talked about English law, where much of our law came from, again, gave reverence to the Word of God and nature's law, what we call nature's law. And I know the next question is probably going to be one thing in my life that changed
Was it anything different than your upbringing?
I like the rest that you've heard from. I grew up in a wonderful home. Great model, and to the point where I wondered if I would ever have that. Was it still possible today? And I am blessed to believe that I do have that, but I think what even firmed it up for me more after I became an adult was the more I got involved and engaged in politics, reading the writings of our political fathers. I was encouraged. I began more of a spiritual growth, I think, than I'd had in some of the churches I had been in. And it was encouraging to me to see the firm foundation, and I think that's why we've been so blessed as a nation, because we have honored and revered the writings that were first given to us by Moses and by others. And we have presidents talking about where they got their writings and quoting Moses and quoting the Old Testament and the New Testament time and again. For me, that was very beneficial in understanding why God has so blessed this nation.
Matt, you know what's coming, but basically, where do you stand on this and why?
Well, I certainly support Varnum decision. I believe that every couple in the state of Iowa, every loving couple in the state of Iowa, has the right to seek a marriage license under civil marriage. I support the court's decision and believe that their decision was correct and really consistent with Iowa history on civil rights. And so I definitely take a view that's more based in law versus scripture. My beliefs really come from the fact that we have equal protection in the state of Iowa and due process in the state of Iowa, and that's what our courts believed, and that's where they ruled on that decision. And frankly, I think any other discussion about our own personal beliefs are interesting, but not really relevant to the decision of the court as it relates to this decision. I personally believe that really it comes down to loving families have the right to choose to live together with the person that they choose as a partner and have the same rights and legal obligations as a married person has, and that's where I stand.
Was there one part of your life, I'll ask, and then has it changed at all?
Well,
for you?
As the only gay person on this panel, I believe that I'm the one person that this law makes a difference in their life. I certainly have options today that I didn't have prior to today, and so from that standpoint, that has had a major impact because I think for thousands of Iowans who are gay, this opens up options for them that they never had afforded to them prior to that, which makes Iowa a pretty damn good place to live from my standpoint.
There was a point you said there, and I want to ask, did this law change, or I shouldn't say law, but this court decision make any difference in your life?
Well, I want to clarify because we see in this argument a lot, in this debate, phraseology is so very important. We're calling this the battleground and repealing the marriage law. Why didn't we call it repealing the marriage law before, when marriage was intact as one man, one woman? Other phrases we'll get into later in the program, but you made the comment that you come from a basis of law versus scripture, and again, that's a bit disingenuous because the law was based so much on scripture. So I too share your concern on the law.
But overall changing of your life, I guess I want to get you pinned down on that one.
Okay. For parents of kindergartners who now are hearing in the classroom about homosexual experiences, partners versus parents, even in the 3-year-old preschool rooms, it's changed it. For people who want to get daycare for their children, it's changed what they can and can't do.
Connie, I ask you the same question. Has anything changed for you since this decision?
It certainly hasn't changed my marriage.
Okay. And Bob, has anything changed for you since this decision?
Yeah, it really hasn't. First of all, this isn't a law, this is an opinion. The law in the books, as Matt would certainly understand, is 595.2. One male, one female. That's still the law today, 2011. So the court offered an opinion. The disturbing trend here is when we say the court did this, or I'm proud to be an Iowans didn't do this. A court did this, and they overstepped their bounds, and that's why 533,000 Iowans voted 3 justices off the bench saying, you didn't let our voice be heard on this issue.
Yep. Well, you know exactly where we're going. We're going to hold that, harness that, because that's exactly where we're going. But we do need to move on to look at another segment from this documentary, In the Life. This segment will focus on the judge's retention issue. So they gave you a little primer here. Let's take a look now. Connie, I want to start with you. Your organization, how do they view the way the court ruled?
We believe that the court ruled well on the Varnum case, if that's what you're talking about.
Yes, sorry.
And that the justices got it right. And all 7 unanimously said that people should be treated equally, that the Equal Protection Clause is part of the foundation of our Constitution and that we need to honor that. And I want to go back to the idea that there's still not a law on the books. Well, what that court case did was take the DOMA law off the books. And so when the court
DOMA,
ruled...
you mean the federal law from 19...
The state law.
The state law.
The state law. And took it off the books, saying that you cannot discriminate against people, a class of people, for whatever reason, and that we base our laws in civil law, not on the Bible, not on the 10 Commandments, but we base it on civil law. And what the justices have to do is interpret the law. And they did that as they were asked to do, and they said that it was not based in equal protection and that the Constitution overrides that DOMA law.
So there's a legal versus moral. How does a justice... Isn't a justice supposed to look at just facts of law and not morality? Or where's that divide at?
It depends where you believe law comes from. If you believe, like Tamara and I do, that law comes from God, that there's a higher standard, and where our founders said there's 2 inseparable rungs for this republic, religion and morality. So we believe that. Or you believe law comes from government or man. So when you talk marriage equality, that's a cute term. But what about the polygamous? Can the polygamous have marriage in Iowa? Can I marry my son? Can can another guy marry his daughter? Where does that piece of it end? In regards, and I'll look to Matt here, is that, Connie says that law has been stricken from the books. I think when you get your Iowa Code book this year, 2011, that law is not stricken from the books. It's still right in there. 595.2, male and female. Why? Because courts don't get to make law. Article 12.
Courts do get to interpret the law and whether or not it is constitutional or not. That's the
Article
I would ask you,
12.1,
Bob.
Connie, it says that the court has the ability to void legislation that they deem unconstitutional. But the second sentence of that is if the founders knew that one day the courts might want to say, take this into their own hands, they said the legislature has the responsibility to enact all legislation to carry out this Constitution. So they should have thrown it back to the legislature to make law, codify it into law, or throw it to the people of Iowa for a vote. The big issue here is the people's voice has not been listened to whatsoever.
So are you saying then, we'll go back to the issue of judge retention, was that the appropriate or the only avenue that was had?
It was the only avenue that we had as a people at that point. Now, you know, when I ran for governor, I said I'd issue an executive order, that I'd place a stay.
Which I believe you were told that you couldn't do.
Well, it would have been a great civics debate. And I'm an educator at heart. It would have been a great civics debate about who gets to make law, who gets to execute law, who gets to amend the Constitution, and what is the court's role here. The thing here, and what the people of Iowa know better, and that's why they voted the way they did. Now, a lot of people want to say, Bob Varenplatz voted out these 3 judges. No, 533,000 Iowans did, and had that election been a month later, the number would have been way north of that, because the more Iowans learned, the more they voted with us.
I would be
interested. And they were concerned about freedom.
I would be interested
if they'll
to
do
know
this,
what
if they'll
you
do this to marriage,
Hold on, Connie.
will they do it to private property? So you might agree with the conclusion they come up with marriage, Connie. But what happens when they take away your private property? They take away your guns. They start making law and executing law from the bench. That is a slippery slope to go down. And God help us if that ever happens.
All right, Connie, I'll let you finish, and then I want to get to Matt, and we got to get in some other parts here.
In all of your debate that I have heard, I have never heard you say what the role of the court is according to the Constitution, according to law. You talk about the role of the legislature, you talk about the role of the executive branch, but you always skip the role of the court. And I believe that the role of the court, and I think this is founded in law and by people who know a lot about the law, that the role of the court is to interpret law and it is to settle disputes. That's exactly what the Varnum case was a dispute with the county, with Polk County, saying that a group of people, 6 couples, wanted to be able to be issued a license, and that they were denied that because of the DOMA law.
Okay, Tamara, I want to get Tamara into this debate. You've been sitting there very patiently. Your thoughts on kind of what Connie said there?
Okay, on morality, not having morality in the law, there are historians that believe if we would have removed morality from the law, Abraham Lincoln would have had no authority to set the slaves free.
I don't think we said morality in the law. I said that there's not that law should not be religion-based.
Okay.
In a recent debate at Waldorf College with former Justice Michael Straight, he agreed with me that there's always someone's morality in the law.
Absolutely.
When we look to the courts, Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, I think number 78, and forgive me, I will not say it nearly as eloquently as he does, but he talks about the role of the court, that it is to solve or come up with a remedy for an injury of an individual citizen, but it is never to intervene in national controversies. In fact, Alexander Hamilton goes on to say that the more weight-bearing that there is for a political body, the more effect it will have on a political body, rather than an individual citizen, the less appropriate it is to have that measure handled in the courts versus the political wing or the legislative and executive branch.
But it is still a branch of our government. So, Matt, I'll ask, what's your view on the intent of the way this, what we've been talking about here?
Well, you know, I appreciate the conversation. It's interesting, but the fact is that all of our law needs to be judged based upon a constitutional standard.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're talking about here, and that's why the courts have the power, and certainly exercised it correctly in the Varnum decision. They have the power and the right to void a law, and that's what they chose to do with DOMA, and they did it based upon equal protection and due process. Just like they did in 1839 in the Ralph decision, where a slave escaped from Missouri into Iowa and sued for his freedom. And it was decided under equal protection and due process that slave had the right to to do that, and he had the right to be free and not viewed as property. We make decisions, and courts make decisions. We're separate and co-equal branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. But they should never be questioned as to whether they have the right to void a law. That is very clearly defined as a role of the court. And I know, Bob, you would never even dispute they have the right to void a law.
They do have the right.
They certainly do.
They do have the right to void a law, as I told Connie, Article 12.1.
Yes.
But the second sentence of Article 12.1 says the legislature shall enact all legislation. So it should have went back to the legislature.
Could have. That was one option.
And because
that was one option. The court
the
could have thrown it back to the legislature.
You see, the court didn't have the ability to say Iowa will be a same-sex marriage state. That's not their role. That's the legislature role. They didn't have the right to say all 99 counties will follow suit. That's not their role. That's the governor's role. They don't have the right to say we're going to hold up Iowa's Constitution to an evolving standard with each generation. That's not their role. That's the people's role to amend the Constitution.
But they could look at 595 and see that it did not meet the constitutional test and void that law, which is all they've done, which allowed the court.
No, if that's all they did.
That is, Bob, that is all they did, and that allowed the people then the right to petition their county recorders. It allowed the people the right to petition their county recorder for a marriage license, and without 595, they had the right to do that.
Because what happens when you void a law?
Yes.
I mean, this is civics here, but if you void a law, it reverts back to prior law, which has always been one man, one woman marriage in the state of Iowa. So the only way they could now come around and say Iowa's a same-sex marriage state is if they wrote it into their opinion. And that's where they legislated from the bench. They can't do that.
Okay.
And then they executed and amended the Constitution. They can't do that.
They can.
No.
And did.
They absolutely did.
Here we go.
Not constitutionally.
I have one more question here for you, Bob, in this segment is 3 justices are out. There's still justices left. If my math does me correct, there's 4 left. In 2 years when they come up for retention, some of them, not all of them, will that be the next target of your organization is to try to remove those 2?
I think it's going to be up to the people of Iowa. I mean,
will that be something you're involved with as a similar role that you took?
I definitely believe Justice Wiggins should be held accountable, and I think the people of Iowa will agree with me as well. As far as our organization, we haven't made that determination yet. If we're going to take on that challenge or not take on that challenge, as you well know, there's a lot of political challenges to put your focus on. Which one deserves our focus?
But at this point, if you had to wage a guess, will you be out leading another, as in the video, the bus campaign or things like that with the new justices on the...
Well, first of all, I don't guess. That's not strategy. But I would tell you this, is that if I was going into the voting booth of 2012, I would vote no on Justice Wiggins.
All right. What about... Connie, will there be an organization, and Matt, I know you both have kind of had some involvement in there, will there be an organization to, if there is a group that tries to rise up again and knock out justices, will there be an opposite side to stand up?
Absolutely. Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, One Iowa, are all part, and a number of other organizations are part of Justice Not Politics. And it's a key organization to really do some education around Iowa and has been working and will continue to work to educate people on the role of the courts and also what a judicial retention vote is really about. There was given a lot of misinformation in the last vote.
And can you explain?
If I could finish my statement, I'd appreciate that. And so we will continue to work. We got started late in that process, and so we ended up with the result in November. But we are working hard to make sure that people have accurate information, that judicial retention is to gauge the competency of the judges and justices. It's not a referendum on one decision that the court made.
Okay, I'm going to ask you for the laundry list of the things that were misinformation, but I do want to move on to our final video segment here as we continue to look at the In the Life documentary, which examines the activity in the legislature, Iowa, and the nation. Let's take a look at that. Tamara, I'll start this round with you. What plans does your organization have when we talk about the constitutional amendment?
Well, and let me touch on the last election, if I may. I don't think it was just one decision that was the main reason they were voted off. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I think it was a perfect storm. Iowans were growing weary of people in power who they felt were abusing their power. There's an anti-establishment sentiment, the Tea Party movement. People were unemployed, and to think someone had a job the rest of their life, whether you liked what they did or not, really caused some resentment. So I think it was just a perfect storm. Will we do this next time around? We'll look at the landscape and strategize and plan from there. Our group really works to educate our members, and then they work as individuals, however they choose.
Senator, I'll ask, as a senator, how much has this issue come up? How much have people talked about it? We heard from Zach Wells there in that discussion. How much have constituents of yours and from across Iowa come and had a discussion to you about a constitutional amendment?
You know, to say that we have not heard from Iowans on both sides of this issue would be untrue. We've heard from probably an equal share of Iowans on this issue, and I think what we tried to determine is there consensus within our leadership, within our caucus, to do something on this issue, and there certainly wasn't. Elections have consequences. We were able to maintain control of the Senate and have opted not to debate marriage equality amendments, marriage amendments in the state of Iowa. And constitutional amendments do require, in Iowa, they're very serious. They require passage in 2 consecutive sessions of a General Assembly. And they're a heavy lift, and they ought to be, because you're changing your state's constitution. And so from that perspective, I think that we are in a position today where we're pretty satisfied that most Iowans have been heard on this issue. 92% of Iowans responded to a KCCI poll that said this has had no impact on their lives. 2 years down the road, there's been no damage done. The bottom line is nothing has really changed in Iowa except for the families that have been given this privilege, that have been afforded this opportunity. And so from that perspective, I don't think that there's an overwhelming rush of people upon us asking us to change the law.
Bob, let's talk politics for a minute. Does Senator Gronstal have a huge re-election battle ahead for him?
I think Senator Gronstal has a huge re-election battle ahead for him, but I think a lot of the senators, especially the Democrat senators, will have a huge re-election battle ahead of them. And the reason is, anytime you suppress the voice of the people, as they've chosen to do, they're going to be held accountable. Part of the reason the judges got voted off is they suppressed the voice of the people. Part of the reason there's no longer Speaker Pelosi, she suppressed the voice of the people. So I think Senator Gronstal is going to have a huge re-election. But in going back, as Matt would understand, the law is still in the books. And when he says, nothing has changed, that's the problem we have right now. It's all about me. That's why we have a national debt the way the national debt is $14.3 trillion. How does it impact me, regardless of what it will do to the next generation? We should have a multi-generational view here. And I don't think we play games with the dynamics of society. And if we're going to start walking away from God's law, where do you stop on this deal? Because Bob's not the right standard, Paul's not the right standard, Tamara's not the right standard. And so when he asks the question, do we allow polygamy? They always stay silent. Do you allow bisexuals to marry a guy and a girl? They stay silent.
Well, those aren't rational arguments.
Well, yes,
Bob.
they are.
Where is that line? Where is that line?
They're completely irrational. Well, they're red herrings.
Well,
and that's why people don't respond to them, because they're silly.
Well, so
they're silly arguments.
You don't think people want polygamy
every
today?
state had a law on sodomy, so it wasn't that far off.
Well, and in the 1960s, we also banned interracial marriage. These are the same arguments that they used to try to try to oppose interracial marriage.
Matt, you're
you guys are bringing
is,
irrational red herring arguments, and I'm
Matt,
sorry, I'm not going to let you get away with it, because it doesn't benefit the conversation. It adds no value. What we're talking about here is gay marriage. We're talking about two people of the same gender who fall in love, have a family, want to have a marriage. That's what we're talking about, and let's stay focused on that.
Tamara, answer if you want. It sounded like you wanted to respond to that.
Well, what about the 14, 13-year-old who falls in love with the 25-year-old? I mean, where do we draw the line? I think it is a valid argument. You started out with the I. When I sat through that hearing that we just witnessed, everyone that spoke on behalf of wanting to change Iowa's marriage law to allow pro or gay, so-called homosexual marriage, I was a lot of what you heard. But the other side, those who wanted to maintain or restore the Constitution as it was, you didn't hear that. You heard the multi-generational, what's best for our community, what's best for our society. In Zach's testimony, we've seen this, he's gone viral, this is the poster child, and yet you hear a couple things he said. He made the comment that there was a sperm donor who allowed both he and his sister. So he has a half sibling, and how important that was to him. You see, those natural bonds mean so much to us. And so no matter what we try and okay or legalize with a piece of paper or a law change or a court usurping to manipulate a law and forcing social order to change, it doesn't replace that natural bond. And Zach admitted it without meaning to admit it.
But he also talked about his mothers and the bond that he has with them, and that he would never replace that either, and that he loves his family because at the end of the day, it goes back to family and family values, and that's what this law is all about, is honoring family and family values, because these are real people.
Sure
these are everyday Iowans. They get up in the morning, they get dressed, they get their kids ready, they go to work, they have bills, they have problems. It's a constituency within our state, within our country, that deserves to have the same equal protections.
If I could continue before I was interrupted. When we look at these people, absolutely. I have friends who are homosexual. Do you have friends who are homosexual?
Those are some of my best conversations.
That's another red herring, and that you can't disagree with the pro-homosexual agenda unless you're hateful or bigoted. I don't believe that to be true. I have relationships with friends who are homosexual, and we have an agreement that we apparently don't agree on this issue, and that doesn't give me any reason to have to succumb to theirs. Let's understand this. What you're wanting to force on the Iowa people is validation of your lifestyle. No matter what you call it, salt and pepper. You can take 2 salt shakers, you can take 2 pepper shakers, but it's no longer salt and pepper. A nut and bolt has a work that it does to secure something and hold it in place. You can have 2 nuts and you can have 2 bolts, but it's no longer the integrity there.
Okay. Thank you. Either response on this side, and I want to move on to one thing.
I would just point out that that what we're really trying to do.
We
is,
meaning?
We meaning when I say we, I'm talking about the groups from One Iowa that promote marriage equality. I think what we're trying to say is we believe that we are a class of citizens entitled to the same rights and responsibilities as any other Iowan. And under our state's constitution, under the laws of the state of Iowa, under due process and equal protection, we are afforded these rights, and that's what the court decided based upon constitutional law, not God's law, but constitutional law, and that is the law of the land.
See, that's
and
the
that is the difference, Bob. I think that you want to discuss religious doctrine and dogma, and we don't allow people that are creating theocracies to establish religious dogmas and doctrines and have that become the law of the land. And that's what you're trying to do.
I think
I
what
want
it
Bob
is
to finish here.
Is you're exactly right. This is the difference. Either we agree with our founders that we're endowed by our Creator, and there's laws of nature, and laws of nature is God, or we believe we're endowed by our government and we're responsible to man's law, which goes right down to, and everyone does what's in the rights of their own eyes. So you say you have this right to marriage because it's about you, your happiness, your whatever.
Equal protection, due process.
And then you say the red herrings are the polygamist, or the person who wants to marry a guy and a girl, or the person who wants to marry a son or daughter. They could have those same arguments. The reason you don't like to hear them is it's true.
They're not
because
rational.
As soon as you take away the standard, so it's Bob's standard or Matt's standard or Paul's standard, as soon as you take away the standards, there's no more standards. That's why we believe God's design for marriage is one man, one woman. God's design for the family, regardless of what Zach, and he seems like a really neat kid, who would have been a young man would have loved to have had in class or been the high school principal of. But all statistics prove the best environment for children is with a biological mom and a
Okay.
biological
That's simply
dad.
not true.
Without,
That is
without
simply not
question.
true.
All
Nonsense.
statistics.
All
Nonsense.
statistics.
Why in the world do you think
don't
when I was a
have-
high school principal, we went out and we recruited like crazy males to teach in the elementary? Why? Because they wanted male and female role models.
Absolutely.
They were
It's a
both
wonderful
good.
thing.
All right, Bob, and I'm gonna let you respond to that, and then we're gonna give about 30 seconds for final statements, I guess is the way it goes. Connie, do you want to respond to that?
It's absolutely not true. There is much data, and the court actually acknowledged that there is so much data that says that what is crucial to children is that they be raised in a loving household, that they are given the support, that they're given the opportunities. A lot of it has to do with economics, but it has nothing to do with whether or not to have one man and one woman in that household, providing that support and giving them the care and the love that they need.
Okay.
I want to make
Not just one man, one woman, mom and dad.
Okay, all right. Well, everybody gets about 30 seconds to finish up their thought or final statement. Tamara, I'm going to start with you.
When standards change, when man tries to make the standard, we can't defend it any longer because it moves. Senator, with all due respect, you were married to a wife I assume you loved at one point. The standard for you has changed. For Senator Angelo, the standard has changed. This is the difficulty when we as human beings try to place ourselves in that arrogant position of trying to decide what is right and wrong. When we submit to a higher authority, and not to be a person of faith, but to be a constitutionalist who understands our heritage and our forefathers.
All right, Connie, 30 seconds.
The standard changed because we evolve. We evolve as a society, and we recognize that sometimes things need to change in our society. When the Varnum case happened, it was very clear that the court said that all people should be treated equal. That standard didn't change. How we interpreted that law did change, and it's important that our society and that we as a people continue to make that growth, and that we acknowledge that it's a good thing for people to grow and to change,
All
and
right.
for the law to grow
That's
and change as well.
Your 30 seconds, Bob, 30.
You know, the whole evolvement issue. Yeah, I suppose we as people, we evolve and we want to have it our way. But God's law doesn't evolve. God's law is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And that should be our standard. The other part, I think, in full disclosure, Paul, In the Life is sponsored by homosexual activists and groups, and this documentary is all based on that. I would love to see Iowa Public Television say, we're going to do a focus on the family documentary about God's design for marriage, God's design for the family. And when you deviate from that, what are the risks that we have
Okay.
to society?
All right, we'll
I think
take
in
that
full
up.
disclosure, we should have that.
Thank you. Matt, less than 30.
I think the key is that Iowans believe that we're all equal, and as such, we have rights and responsibilities. And Iowans that play by the rules and do the right things have the same rights, whether they're gay or whether they're heterosexual. And I think the bottom line from my perspective is we need to stay focused on the fact that we do have a Constitution in the state of Iowa.
Very good. That's Matt McCoy, Senator from Des Moines. Connie Ryan Terrell is Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance. Bob Vanderplatz is President and CEO of Family Leader. And Tamara Scott is State Director, Concerned Women of America. Thank you so very much. Good spirited discussion.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you so very much for joining us here. That's it for Iowa's Marriage Battleground. My name is Paul Yeager. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.